I offered my sister $20,000 for her dream wedding. She thanked me by trying to lock me into a $150,000 contract behind my back. When I found out, I didn't just pull the money. I called the venue, I called her fiancé's billionaire father, and I systematically dismantled the fantasy life my family had built on my bank account. They thought they were planning a wedding. They had no idea they were planning their own ruin. And the worst part? I was supposed to be the maid of honor, smiling right beside them as they did it. My relationship with my younger sister, Sophie, has always been protective. I'm the older sister by 7 years, the one who paved the way. I built a successful landscape architecture firm from the ground up, pouring every ounce of my energy into creating something stable, something beautiful, something mine. Our parents, Eleanor and Robert, are good people in that abstract greeting card kind of way. They love us, but their love is often tangled up in appearances. My father's series of almost successful business ventures left them financially precarious, and my mother's social anxiety morphed into a desperate need to project wealth and status we simply didn't have. I became the quiet solution, the reliable daughter, the one whose success could be subtly borrowed to buff their family image. So when Sophie got engaged to Alex Harrison, it wasn't just a celebration. It was a social coronation. The Harrisons weren't just comfortable, they were titans. Alex's father, Julian Harrison, was a real estate mogul whose name was plastered on half the new developments in the state. My mother was ecstatic. This was it. The validation she'd craved her entire life. Sophie, caught in the middle, just wanted a beautiful day. She sat me down in my office, surrounded by blueprints and soil samples, her eyes wide with excitement. "Clara, I want you to be my maid of honor." Of course I said yes, my heart swelling with love for her. Then came the topic of money. "Mom and Dad are, you know," she said, her voice dropping. "They can't really contribute much." I knew this. I had been planning for it. "Don't worry about it," I told her, pulling up my personal finance spreadsheet. "I've set aside $20,000 for you. It's yours. Use it for the venue, the dress, whatever you need to make the day perfect. No strings attached." She burst into tears, hugging me tightly. "You're the best sister in the world," she whispered. And for a moment, it felt true. It felt simple. $20,000 was a significant amount for me, the result of years of careful saving. But it was a gift I was happy to give. My one condition was clarity. "This is the budget, Soph. We can make this amount work beautifully, but we have to be smart about it." She nodded, promising we would. That promise lasted about 48 hours. The wedding planning wasn't a collaboration. It became my mother's full-time job, with Sophie as her eager apprentice. My design studio, once my sanctuary, became their unofficial headquarters. They'd show up with fabric swatches and catering menus, each one a little more expensive than the last. My gentle reminders about the budget were brushed off with a breezy, "Oh, Clara, don't be so pragmatic. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event." Or my mother's favorite, "We have to consider what the Harrisons are used to. We can't look provincial." I felt a familiar dread coiling in my stomach. I was no longer the generous sister. I was the director of budget, the official wet blanket on their champagne-fueled dreams, The 20,000 was no longer a gift. It was a down payment on a fantasy I was increasingly expected to bankroll. The first major red flag was the dress. Sophie found a gown by an obscure European designer that cost nearly half my initial gift. When I pointed this out, my mother put her hand on my arm, her expression one of grave seriousness. "Clara, this isn't just a dress. It's a statement. It tells the Harrisons that we understand quality." The implication was clear. My money was being used to send their message. Still, I let it slide. It was her dress, her day. But then came the flowers, the photographer, the custom invitations embossed with gold leaf. Every conversation was about upgrading. Every decision was framed as a necessity to avoid embarrassment. The breaking point, the moment the quiet dread turned into cold, hard fury, came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in a contentious meeting with a city planning board, fighting for a public park project I was passionate about. My phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line read, "Contract for your review. Sophie and Alex's wedding at the Evermore Estate." I figured it was just another vendor quote they wanted me to look at. I opened the attached PDF, my eyes scanning the details. The venue was breathtaking. A historic mansion with sprawling gardens that I myself had admired professionally. Then I saw the number. The total cost for the venue rental and mandatory catering package was $152,800. My breath caught in my throat. This was insane. It was financial suicide. I scrolled down to the signature page, expecting to see my father's name, or perhaps a hopeful blank space. But what I saw sent a shock of ice through my veins. There, typed neatly under the line for financial guarantor, was my name, my full legal name, my business address, and my company's federal tax ID number. They hadn't just ignored my budget. They had taken my identity and were attempting to chain me to a debt that would cripple my business and my life for years. In the body of the email, the venue manager had written, "Hi, Clara. Your mother, Eleanor, said you would be handling the financial arrangements and to send the contract directly to you for signature. We need it back by Friday to secure the date." I stared at the screen, the angry voices of the planning board fading into a dull roar. They hadn't asked. They hadn't even tried to persuade me. They had gone behind my back, used my name, and presented it to a third party as a done deal, assuming I would just fall in line to avoid a scene. They saw my generosity not as a gift, but as a weakness to be exploited. A cold, quiet clarity washed over me. The time for being the pragmatic, wet blanket sister was over. They had mistaken my kindness for a blank check. It was time to show them what happened when that check bounced. I excused myself from the meeting, my hand shaking not with fear, but with a kind of furious energy I hadn't felt in years. I stepped into the hallway and made 3 calls. The first was to the venue manager at the Evermore Estate. I kept my voice calm, professional, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Hello, this is Clara Evans. I've just received a contract you sent over for the wedding of Sophie Evans and Alex Harrison. I need to make something unequivocally clear. I am not the financial guarantor for this event. My name was used without my knowledge or consent. I will not be signing this contract, nor will I be responsible for any costs associated with your venue. Please remove my name from all your records immediately." There was a stunned silence on the other end. followed by a flustered apology. I said, "Thank you," and hung up. The second call was to my personal banker. I explained the situation and had a temporary alert placed on all my accounts, personal and business, flagging any unusual inquiries or attempts to use my information as a guarantee for credit. It was a preemptive strike. I knew my family. When one door closed, they'd start jiggling handles on all the others. The third action wasn't a call, but an email. I typed it carefully, letting each word land with the weight of a stone. It was addressed to my mother, my father, and my sister. The subject line was simple: wedding contribution. The body of the email was even simpler. Due to the attempt to commit me to a financial contract of over $150,000 without my consent, I am hereby formally withdrawing my offer of a $20,000 wedding gift. The original terms of my gift were based on trust, which has been irrevocably broken. I will not be contributing financially to the wedding in any capacity. I wish you the best. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. There was no rage in the words, no plea for an apology. It was the dispassionate, final language of a contract being terminated. I had given them a gift, and they had tried to turn it into a leash. So I took it back. All of it. I walked back into my meeting, sat down, and delivered the most persuasive, sharp, and successful presentation of my career. The fury had coalesced into focus. As I drove home that evening, I didn't feel guilt or sadness. I felt a profound, almost terrifying sense of lightness. I had spent a decade being the family's shock absorber, quietly soaking up their financial irresponsibility and social anxieties. But you can only bend something so far before it snaps back. I had just snapped back, and I had a sinking feeling that the sound it made was going to echo through all of our lives. They thought the argument was about a venue. They didn't understand that this was never about the money. It was about the assumption that my life, my success, and my security were theirs to command. And that assumption had just expired. The fallout was faster and more furious than I could have imagined. It took less than an hour for my phone to start vibrating itself off my kitchen counter. The first call was from Sophie. I let it go to voicemail. The message she left was a torrent of tearful confusion and accusations. "Clara, what did you do? The venue called. They said the booking is on hold. They said you refused to pay. How could you do this to me? You're ruining my wedding." There was no mention of the contract, no acknowledgement of what she and my mother had done. In her world, the problem wasn't their deception. It was my reaction to it. Then came my mother. Her voicemail was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. It started with feigned concern, transitioned to wounded pride, and ended with thinly veiled threats. "Clara, darling, there seems to have been a terrible misunderstanding. We were going to talk to you about the venue. Of course, we just wanted to get the paperwork in order first. For you to go behind our backs and embarrass us like this, what will the Harrisons think? You're making the entire family look foolish." The sheer audacity of her framing, accusing me of going behind her back, was almost impressive. I didn't respond to any of it. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in silence, watching the city lights flicker on. I knew this was just the overture. The real confrontation would have to happen face to face. This wasn't the first time my financial stability had been treated as a communal resource. This was just the most blatant. Years ago, when Sophie was starting college, I'd set up a dedicated savings account to help her with tuition and living expenses, contributing to it every month. It was my way of ensuring she could focus on her studies without the burden of debt. Halfway through her sophomore year, my parents sat me down for one of their family meetings. They wanted to remodel the kitchen. It was dated, they argued, and it was embarrassing when they had people over. They had a plan, a contractor, and a budget they couldn't afford. They asked to borrow from Sophie's college fund. "Just for a few months," my father had said, his eyes avoiding mine. "My commission from the Henderson deal is about to come through. We'll pay it all back before she even needs it for the next semester's tuition." My mother added the emotional garnish. "It's for the good of the family, Clara. A rising tide lifts all boats." I was younger then, more susceptible to the pressure. I trusted them. Reluctantly, I agreed. The Henderson deal, like so many of my father's deals, never materialized. The money was never paid back. I ended up working double time, taking on extra projects, and quietly replenishing the fund myself, so Sophie would never know the difference. They got their gleaming new kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, a perfect backdrop for their performance of prosperity. I got sleepless nights and a quiet, simmering resentment. They never spoke of it again. When I tried to bring it up once, my mother waved her hand dismissively and said, "Oh, don't be so transactional, dear. It all evens out in the end." But it never did. It was a pattern. Small loans that were never repaid. My credit card being accidentally used for online shopping sprees. My business account being tapped for emergency car repairs. Each incident was small enough to be explained away, but together they formed a suffocating web of entitlement. My success wasn't a source of pride for them. It was a resource. My strength wasn't something to be celebrated. It was something to be leaned on until I buckled. The $150,000 venue contract wasn't an anomaly. It was the logical conclusion of a decade of unchecked boundary crossing. They had finally pushed too far. They had forgotten that the person who quietly fixes everything is also the person who knows exactly how everything can be broken. This time, I wasn't going to fix it. I was going to let it stay broken. The silence from my side was clearly unnerving them, because the next morning, they showed up at my front door. My mother, my father, and Sophie. The holy trinity of disappointment. They didn't knock so much as bang. A frantic, insistent pounding that echoed through my apartment. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and opened the door. The sight of them was almost cinematic. Sophie's face was blotchy and swollen from crying. My mother's was a tight mask of indignation. My father stood slightly behind them, shifting his weight from foot to foot. The classic posture of a man who knows he's in the wrong, but has been sent to fight a battle anyway. "We need to talk," my mother said, pushing past me into the foyer. Sophie followed, slumping onto my sofa and immediately bursting into a fresh round of sobs. "How could you, Clara?" she wailed. "You know this wedding is the most important day of my life." I closed the door and turned to face them, leaning against it. I kept my voice level. The most important day of your life was about to become the most catastrophic day of mine. Did you really think I wouldn't notice a $150,000 contract? My mother scoffed, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. It was a negotiating tactic. We were going to talk to you about it. You can't just go nuclear and cancel everything. You have made us look like fools to the venue, and God knows what they'll say to other vendors. You made yourselves look like fools. I corrected her, my voice dropping a little lower, a little sharper. You used my name. You used my company's information. That's not a negotiating tactic, Mom. In some circles, that's called fraud. My father finally spoke up, his voice attempting a tone of paternal authority that he hadn't earned in decades. Now, let's not use that kind of language. We're family. This is a simple misunderstanding that you've blown completely out of proportion. A misunderstanding? I laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound. You misunderstood that my life's work is not your personal line of credit. You misunderstood that my offer of $20,000 didn't have an extra zero on the end. What exactly was misunderstood? Sophie looked up, her tears momentarily forgotten. But what about Alex? What about the Harrisons? They're expecting a beautiful wedding, not whatever cheap thing we can afford now. You're humiliating me in front of my new family. And there it was, the core of it. This wasn't about Sophie's dream. It was about the image they wanted to sell to the Harrisons. They weren't building a marriage. They were engineering a merger. I was supposed to be the seed capital. So this is about them, I said quietly. This is about performing for the Harrisons. This is about giving your sister the start she deserves, my mother snapped. Something you clearly don't care about. After everything we've done for you. I held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. Don't you dare start with that. The everything you've done for me account was paid in full, years ago, with interest. I looked directly at my father. Remember the kitchen remodel? He flinched, a barely perceptible motion, but I saw it. I remember a lot of things. I walked over to my desk and picked up a pen and a piece of paper. You want to talk about money? Let's talk about money. I started writing a list. Sophie's tuition shortfall, the loan for the BMW down payment, the $5,000 for the investment opportunity that vanished, the credit card debt you transferred to me in college, telling me it would build my credit score. With each item, the color drained from my parents' faces. Sophie just stared, her mouth slightly agape. She had no idea. She'd been shielded from all of it. The golden child kept pristine while I did the dirty work behind the scenes. So no, I said, putting the pen down. I will not be financing this wedding. I will not be your guarantor. My original offer is off the table. You want to impress the Harrisons? Then you figure out how to do it honestly. You plan a wedding you can actually afford. My mother's composure finally cracked. Her face contorted with rage. You selfish, ungrateful girl. She hissed. You would let your own sister be humiliated just to prove a point. The point, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, is that I am done. I am done being the foundation for this house of cards you call a family. The bank is closed. They stared at me, speechless. The fury, the tears, the blustering. It had all evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard shock of reality. They had played their final card, and it had been rejected. Without another word, they turned and left, my father practically pulling my mother out the door. Sophie gave me one last look, a mixture of betrayal and dawning comprehension, before following them. As the door clicked shut behind them, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollowed out. I had just declared war on my own family. And the one person I hadn't considered in all of this, the one person who stood to lose the most besides me, was Alex's father, Julian Harrison. I realized, with a sickening lurch in my stomach, that I had to talk to him. I had to control the narrative before my mother spun some wild tale of my cruelty and instability. I had to face the Titan. The decision to call Julian Harrison was one of the most terrifying I've ever made. He wasn't just a wealthy father-in-law-to-be. He was a legend in the development world. A man known for his sharp intellect and intolerance for nonsense. My mother's fear of looking provincial in front of him was an echo of a much larger, more intimidating reality. He was a shark, and my family had just thrown a whole lot of blood in the water, with my name attached to it. I couldn't let my mother's version of events be the one he heard first. I found the number for his private office through a business contact. When his executive assistant answered, I kept my introduction brief and professional. My name is Clara Evans. I am a landscape architect and the sister of Alex Harrison's fiancé. I need to request a brief 15-minute meeting with Mr. Harrison regarding a sensitive family matter that has unfortunately crossed into a professional domain. It is a matter of some urgency. The formality seemed to work. She told me to hold. A minute later, she came back on the line. Mr. Harrison can see you tomorrow morning at 10. I spent the rest of the night preparing, not as a younger sister, but as a business owner facing a potential crisis. I printed the email from the venue. I printed the contract with my name listed as guarantor. I put together a concise, one-page summary of my own firm's financials to demonstrate my stability and professionalism, and to implicitly show that while I was successful, a $150,000 surprise liability was not something I could, or would, absorb. I was building a case, not just to defend myself, but to define myself in his eyes, before my family did it for me. The next morning, I walked into the Harrison Corp headquarters. It was a world of glass, steel, and quiet. Immense power. I was led to a corner office with a panoramic view of the city, a view that included 2 of my own firm's completed park projects. When Julian Harrison walked in, he was exactly as I'd pictured. Impeccably dressed, with intelligent, piercing eyes that seemed to assess everything at once. He didn't smile. He just gestured to a chair. Ms. Evans, you have my attention. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Mr. Harrison, thank you for seeing me. I'm here because my family, in their enthusiasm for my sister's wedding, has created a situation that I felt you needed to hear about directly from me. I slid the folder across the vast mahogany desk. My sister and my mother approached me for a wedding contribution. I offered them a gift of $20,000. Yesterday I received this contract from the Evermore Estate, a venue they selected for over $150,000. As you can see, my name and my company were listed as the financial guarantor, without my knowledge or consent. He picked up the contract, his eyes scanning the page with unnerving speed. He didn't register shock or anger. His expression was completely neutral, which was somehow more intimidating. He put the paper down and looked at me. And what was your response? I contacted the venue immediately and informed them that I was not the guarantor and would not be signing the contract. I then informed my family that my original offer of a gift was withdrawn due to this breach of trust. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He was silent for a long moment, just watching me. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. This is a bold move, Ms. Evans. Most people in your position would try to smooth things over to avoid family conflict, especially with a merger like this on the horizon. With all due respect, sir, my business and my financial security are not bargaining chips in a family conflict, I said, my voice steady. I have worked very hard to build my firm. I will not allow it to be jeopardized by anyone, family, or not. I came to you because I believe in transparency. I wanted you to have the facts, as I knew my mother would likely present a very different version of this story. I wanted you to know that the Evans family's financial reality may not be what you have been led to believe. A flicker of something, was it respect? Amusement? Crossed his face. I appreciate your candor, he said, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly. It's a rare commodity. He gestured out the window. The Meridian Park and the waterfront promenade down by the pier. Those are your projects, correct? I was taken aback. Yes, they are. I know. I was on the community board that approved the final designs for Meridian. Your proposal was brilliant. You took a difficult, neglected space and saw potential no one else did. You were thorough, cost-conscious, and you fought like hell for your vision. I remember being impressed. He paused, looking back at me. It seems you apply the same principles to your personal life. The tension in my shoulders eased slightly. This conversation was not going at all how I had anticipated. My family is complicated, I said, deciding on a simple truth. They are led by aspirations rather than realities. I've spent years trying to bridge that gap for them. A thankless job, he stated. Not as a question, but as a fact. He tapped the folder on his desk. So, the grand wedding is off the table. The wedding my parents and sister envisioned is, yes, I confirmed. What they choose to do now, with their own resources, is up to them. He nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. I'm building a new corporate headquarters upstate. 200 acres. The board wants a showpiece, something that reflects innovation and environmental stewardship. But the architects we've consulted are all submitting the same sterile corporate plaza designs. They lack soul. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. They lack what you did with Meridian Park. I want you to draw up a proposal. Not a bid, a proposal. I want to see what you would do with a blank canvas and a real budget. Forget the wedding. Forget your family's drama. Show me a vision. I was stunned into silence. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a lifeline thrown from the most unexpected of quarters. It was a validation that was so profound, so completely divorced from my family's toxic ecosystem, that it felt like breathing fresh air for the first time in years. Mr. Harrison, I don't know what to say. Say you'll do it, he said simply. Send my office your fee for the preliminary design work. And Ms. Evans, he added, a hint of a smile finally touching his lips. Welcome to the world of dealing with realities. It's a lot less crowded here. I walked out of that building feeling like I was floating. My family had tried to use the Harrison name to trap me, but in doing so, they had inadvertently given me the greatest opportunity of my life. The irony was so thick, I could taste it. Meanwhile, back at my parents' house, the house of cards was beginning to tremble. The news that my $20,000, let alone the imaginary $150,000, was gone, sent shockwaves through their fragile ecosystem. Sophie called Alex hysterical. Her narrative was that I, the jealous, cold-hearted older sister, had sabotaged her dream out of spite. Alex, who had only ever seen the polished, happy version of our family, was caught in the middle. He suggested they postpone the wedding, to give things time to cool down. To my mother, postponement was tantamount to cancellation. It was a public admission of failure. The performance had been ruined, and the star of the show, my sister, was beginning to realize that the life she'd been promised was built on a foundation of my silent sacrifice, a foundation that had just been dynamited. The weeks that followed my meeting with Julian Harrison were surreal. On one hand, my professional life exploded with a kind of creative energy I hadn't felt in years. I threw myself into the Harrison project, working late into the night, fueled by coffee and the sheer thrill of the opportunity. The design flowed out of me. It was ambitious, incorporating native wetlands, sustainable energy sources, and public access green spaces. It was the project of a lifetime, and I knew it. Julian, he insisted I call him Julian, was a dream client. He was decisive, insightful, and treated me as a respected peer. Our meetings were about vision and logistics, not emotional blackmail. For the first time, I felt seen for my talent, not my bank balance. On the other hand, my family life imploded in slow motion. The silence from my end was a vacuum that they filled with escalating panic and recrimination. First, the guilt trip started. My father left a series of rambling voicemails, his voice thick with a martyr's sorrow. I don't know what we did to deserve this, Clara. Your mother hasn't been sleeping. Your sister is heartbroken. A family is supposed to stick together, not tear each other apart over money. He never once mentioned the contract or the lies. The blame was solely on my reaction, my boundary. Sophie's texts became increasingly bitter. They went from pleading, "Please, Clara, just talk to me. We can fix this," to accusatory, "You always had to be the center of attention. You couldn't just let me have this one thing." She accused me of being jealous of her happiness, of her marrying into a family like the Harrisons. The idea was so preposterous, it was almost funny. I wasn't jealous of her. I was terrified for her. She was marrying a man whose family she was trying to deceive before the vows were even exchanged. The most telling communication came from my mother. She sent a long, meticulously crafted email. It didn't apologize. Instead, it reframed history. She painted a picture of herself and my father as struggling parents who had sacrificed everything for their children. She detailed the long hours my father worked on his ventures, the social events she endured to make connections for the family, and how they had always provided a loving, stable home. The subtext was a bill being rendered. "We gave you life, and you owe us." The email culminated in a staggering proposition. If I would just reconsider my harsh stance and help them secure a modest loan to cover the venue deposit, they would agree to a more reasonable wedding. They were still trying to negotiate, still failing to grasp the fundamental breach of trust. I replied to her email with a single sentence. "The conversation is over." That's when they started to unravel. The modest, downsized wedding they were now forced to plan became a source of constant bitter conflict. Every cost-cutting measure was a fresh humiliation for my mother. Every compromise was a reminder to Sophie of the grand vision she had lost. Their arguments, which I heard about through the family grapevine of aunts and cousins, were apparently epic. Sophie blamed my mother for pushing too hard. My mother blamed my father for his financial failures. My father blamed me for being unforgiving. It was a circular firing squad of blame, and for the first time, I wasn't standing in the middle to take the bullets. The true breaking point came during a tense dinner between my parents, Sophie, and Alex. Alex, trying to be a supportive fiancé, had been researching more affordable, beautiful venues. He presented a list of charming wineries and rustic barns. According to a cousin who got the story from Sophie later, my mother looked at the list with utter disdain and said, "A barn? Do you want the Harrisons to think we're farmers?" Alex, a genuinely kind and patient man, finally lost his temper. He told them that he loved Sophie and wanted to marry her, not her family's social ambitions. He said he would be happy to get married in a courthouse, as long as he was with her. He was tired of the drama, the obsession with money, and the constant pressure. He told Sophie they needed to make a decision based on what they wanted, not what her parents demanded. This put Sophie in an impossible position. Choose the man she loved, or choose the fantasy her mother had curated for her. The pressure was too much. The wedding was officially postponed indefinitely. The engagement was hanging by a thread. And of course, it was all my fault. I received a text from Sophie that night that was pure venom. "I hope you're happy. You've destroyed everything. You've destroyed my life." I didn't reply. I was sitting at my drafting table, looking at the preliminary designs for the Harrison campus. My work was real. It was honest. It was built on a foundation of mutual respect. What they had been building was a lie, and it had collapsed under its own weight. I hadn't destroyed her life. I had simply refused to continue funding the illusion. The devastating part was that I wasn't sure Sophie could tell the difference. The indefinite postponement of the wedding was the beginning of the end for Sophie and Alex. The fault lines that had been exposed were too deep to ignore. Alex saw a side of my family he couldn't unsee. The obsession with status, the willingness to deceive, the transactional nature of their relationships. He started pulling away, spending more time on work trips, becoming less available. Sophie's panic grew, and her bitterness toward me calcified into something hard and permanent. In her mind, I hadn't just withdrawn a wedding gift. I had actively sabotaged her future. I poured every ounce of that chaotic energy into the Harrison proposal. I worked 16-hour days, refining every detail, from the drainage systems to the species of native grasses that would require the least irrigation. It was more than a project. It was my salvation. It was tangible proof that my worth was in my work, not in my willingness to be a doormat. I submitted the final proposal, a 60-page document, complete with architectural renderings and a phased budget, and waited. A week later, Julian Harrison summoned me to his office. He didn't say a word as I walked in. He just pointed to the proposal, sitting in the center of his desk. "This," he said, his voice quiet with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up, "is genius. It's exactly what I wanted, but didn't know how to ask for. The board reviewed it yesterday. We are not putting it out to bid. The project is yours. Just like that. No negotiation. No competition. He named a number for the contract that was so large, so life-altering, that I almost couldn't process it. It was more than my firm had billed in the previous 3 years combined. I managed to maintain my professional composure, shake his hand, and thank him. But the moment I got back to my car, I broke down and sobbed. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of overwhelming, gut-wrenching relief. It was the feeling of a massive weight. One I'd been carrying for so long, I'd forgotten it was there, finally being lifted. That same evening, Alex officially broke up with Sophie. He did it kindly, from what I heard, telling her that he loved her, but that their visions for the future were fundamentally incompatible. The fallout was nuclear. My phone became a conduit for pure, undiluted rage. My mother left a screaming voicemail, calling me a snake, a monster who had purposefully destroyed her own sister's happiness. "You poisoned him against us," she shrieked. "You took her future away, and for what? To feel powerful? I hope you're alone forever." My father sent a curt, formal email, stating that as far as he was concerned, I was no longer his daughter. Sophie didn't contact me directly. Instead, she took to social media, posting a vague but pointed status about family who are strangers and betrayal that cuts deeper than any knife. All our mutual friends and extended family saw it. My phone buzzed with texts from concerned cousins and judgmental aunts, all wanting my side of the story. I didn't give them one. There was nothing to say. People would believe what they wanted to believe. The ones who knew me, truly knew me, would understand. The rest didn't matter. I put my phone on silent, changed my number the next day, and created a new email address just for personal use. I sent the new information to a handful of trusted friends and my lawyer. For everyone else, I simply ceased to exist. I was severing the limb to save the body. A month later, I signed the final contracts for the Harrison project. My firm had to scale up fast. I hired new architects, project managers, and support staff. I moved into a larger office space in a building downtown. My days were a whirlwind of site visits, client meetings, and logistical planning. It was stressful, chaotic, and the most fulfilling work of my life. I was building something real, something that would stand for decades. One afternoon, I was looking through portfolios for a junior architect position when a familiar name jumped out at me. Alex Harrison. He had applied for the job. His resume was impressive. Top of his class, excellent internships, but he was the last person I expected to see. I debated for a long time before calling him. It felt complicated. But Julian's belief in directness had rubbed off on me. We met for coffee. He looked tired but relieved. "I know this is awkward," he said before I could even speak. "But when I saw you were leading this project, I had to apply. What you're building here, it's the kind of work I've always wanted to do. Honest work." We talked for an hour. He never badmouthed Sophie. He just said that he realized they wanted fundamentally different things out of life. He wanted a partner, and she, influenced by my mother, wanted an audience. "What your family did to you was wrong, Clara," he said, his expression serious. "And the way you handled it, with such integrity, I've never forgotten that." He paused. "For what it's worth, my father feels the same way. He says you have more courage than any man he's ever done business with." "I hired him. It wasn't a favor." He was the best candidate for the job. And as we started working together, a new, quieter relationship began to form. One built on the solid ground of mutual respect and shared values. It was slow, tentative, and completely separate from the rubble of his past with my sister. The news that I had not only landed the Harrison contract, but had also hired her ex-fiancé, reached my family eventually. I can only imagine their reaction. The narrative of me as the jealous, lonely spinster was suddenly harder to sell. I wasn't just surviving without them. I was thriving on a scale they couldn't comprehend. They had tried to tether me to their sinking ship, but I had untied the rope and built a fleet of my own. And in the quiet moments, late at night in my new, spacious apartment overlooking a city I was literally helping to reshape, I finally felt at peace. It was a peace born not from their absence, but from my own presence in a life I had built for myself, on my own terms. The first year of the Harrison project was a blur of intense, gratifying work. My firm flourished, my reputation grew, and my personal life with Alex settled into a calm, steady rhythm. We were partners in every sense of the word. Our shared passion for design, cementing a bond that was deeper than the one he'd had with my sister, because it was built on truth. We bought a piece of land ourselves, a rugged, overlooked plot with a stream running through it, and started designing our own home. The process was a quiet joy, a collaboration free from drama and expectation. During this time, I had zero contact with my family. I maintained my new phone number and email address, and I instructed my lawyer to return any mail sent to his office from them, unopened. It was a clean break. The silence was a balm. I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the next manipulative text or guilt-ridden voicemail. I learned to sleep through the night again. But you can't erase your history. You can only build over it. The past re-emerged in the most unexpected way. I received a certified letter at my office. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. My heart seized for a moment, my old panic flaring. My first thought was that my parents had found a way to sue me. With trembling hands, I opened it. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a probate notification. My father had passed away. He'd had a sudden, massive heart attack a week prior. The letter was cold and formal. It stated that he had left a will, and I was named in it. A wave of complex, conflicting emotions washed over me. A hollow ache of loss for the father he could have been, a flicker of the old anger, and a profound, weary sadness. He was gone, and we had never reconciled. We never would. I called Alex, my voice unsteady. He was at my side in 15 minutes, holding my hand as I stared blankly at the wall. "What do you want to do?" he asked gently. I think I have to go to the reading of the will," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "Not for the money. There isn't any money. But for closure." Alex nodded. "I'll go with you." The day of the will reading was gray and overcast, a perfect cliché. The law office was small and stuffy. My mother and Sophie were already there, both dressed in black. They looked older, worn down by a bitterness that seemed to have settled deep into their bones. When they saw me walk in with Alex, their faces hardened into masks of pure contempt. My mother's eyes flickered to Alex, a flash of the old possessiveness in her gaze, as if he were a prize that had been stolen from them. Sophie wouldn't even look at me. She just stared at a spot on the wall, her jaw tight. The lawyer, a tired-looking man named Mr. Gable, cleared his throat and began to read. The will was simple. My father's few assets, a small life insurance policy, the heavily mortgaged house, were left entirely to my mother. There were no surprises. Then, Gable reached the final section, and to my eldest daughter, Clara Evans, he read, his voice monotone, I leave the contents of the lockbox held at the City Bank, number 34B. In this box, she will find an apology for all the ways I failed her. I was a weak man, led by the ambitions of others, and I allowed her strength to become a crutch for my own inadequacies. I broke her trust, and in doing so, I broke my own family. My final wish is that she can find it in her heart to forgive me, and to remember the man I was before the money, and the lack of it ruined everything. Silence. A thick, suffocating silence filled the room. I was completely stunned. My mother was staring at the lawyer, her face pale with shock and fury. Sophie's head had snapped around, and she was looking at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. My father, in death, had finally told the truth. He had given me the one thing I never thought I would receive. An admission, an apology, a validation, in his own words, of everything I had experienced. My mother recovered first. "That's it?" she demanded, her voice shrill. "He leaves her an apology? After she destroyed this family? After she stole my daughter's fiancé? That's what he leaves her." Mr. Gable looked at her over his glasses. "Ma'am, I'm just reading what is written." Sophie stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. She pointed a shaking finger at me. You did this. You were always his favorite. Even now you find a way to make it all about you. To make us the villains, and you the saint." "Sophie, stop," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "No!" she shrieked. "I won't stop. You get your apology written into a will. And what do we get? A mountain of debt and a house that's falling apart. You have everything. The career, the money. Him." She gestured wildly at Alex. "And he leaves you his last words. It's not fair." And in that moment, seeing her raw, childish jealousy, her complete inability to see beyond her own perceived slights, I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt an immense, bottomless pity. She was still trapped in the same toxic narrative, the same zero-sum game of victimhood and blame that my mother had taught her. She couldn't see the apology as a tragic final attempt at grace. She could only see it as another thing I had been given, that she had been denied. I stood up, taking Alex's hand. "We're leaving," I said quietly. I looked at my mother, whose face was a thundercloud of rage. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mom." Then I looked at my sister. "And I'm sorry for yours, Sophie. Truly." We walked out of that office, leaving them in the suffocating silence of their own making. As the cool air hit my face, I felt a single tear trace a path down my cheek. It wasn't for the father I had lost. It was for the sister who was already gone. After the will reading, I went to the bank. The lockbox was small and old. Inside, there wasn't a long, heartfelt letter. There was just a single faded photograph and a small tarnished silver locket. The photograph was of my father and me at a father-daughter dance when I was about 8 years old. He was looking down at me, and his face held a look of pure, uncomplicated adoration. I was beaming, missing my 2 front teeth. It was from a time before the failed businesses, before the borrowing and the lies, before everything became transactional. The locket was the one my grandmother had given me, the one I had lost on a family vacation years ago. I'd been devastated, and my father had spent hours searching for it in the sand to no avail. He must have found it later and kept it all these years. Tucked inside was a tiny folded piece of paper. On it, in his familiar scrawl, were just 3 words. You were right. That was the apology. It was more powerful than a 1,000-word letter. It was the truth, finally acknowledged. I closed the box, a sense of profound, quiet finality settling over me. The war was over. I hadn't won. Nobody had, but it was over. Life moved on. Alex and I finished our house, a beautiful structure of wood and glass that felt like a part of the landscape. We got married on the property in a small, quiet ceremony, with only a handful of our closest friends, and Julian, who walked me down the aisle he'd essentially created. The Harrison Campus project was a resounding success, winning architectural awards and becoming a new landmark for the state. My firm was more successful than I had ever dreamed possible. I never heard from my mother or sister again. I learned through the grapevine that my mother had to sell the house and move into a small condo. Sophie, after a series of dead-end jobs, ended up moving in with her. Their world had shrunk, contracting around their shared bitterness. They were trapped together in the past, endlessly relitigating old wounds, with me as the perpetual villain of their story. Sometimes the thought of them brought a pang of sadness, a ghostly echo of the love I once had for them. But it was a sadness I could live with. It was the price of my peace. The lesson in all of this is a hard one. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from the people you love. Family is not an unconditional contract that requires you to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. A real family, a healthy family, doesn't see your strength as a resource to be plundered. They see it as a wonder to be celebrated. They don't resent your boundaries. They respect them. They don't demand your sacrifice. They encourage your growth. I found that family with Alex, with Julian, with the team I built at my firm, and with the friends who stood by me. It's a family of choice, not of obligation. And it's a family built on the same principles I use to design my landscapes. With a strong foundation, with respect for the existing terrain, with room to grow, and with an eye toward creating something beautiful and enduring. If you're out there feeling like the designated ATM, the emotional shock absorber, or the unpaid therapist for your family, I want you to hear this. Your life is your own. Your success is your own. Your peace is worth fighting for. Setting a boundary isn't an act of aggression. It's an act of self-preservation. It may be the hardest thing you ever have to do. But on the other side of that difficult choice, you might just find the space to build a life that is truly, authentically, and peacefully your own. You don't have to destroy your family's world. Sometimes you just have to have the courage to step out of it and build your own.